Yo, what is going on, guys? Phaser here, and welcome back to another video. And you may be wondering, in the world, what's this? I have made a lot of progress as far as the railway. I'm going to be doing other stuff in the video, not just this, so don't worry about that. But at the same time, this video series and this YouTube channel isn't necessarily a Let's Play for Minecraft. Rather, it is something I have in the background while I, preach whatever it is God wants me to that specific day. But with that being said, I do want to say I will be, connecting this very shortly, and we'll be done with the railway just temporarily while we do other things in the world. But we're probably gonna have to go mining because we're gonna go mining. Yeah, we're gonna go mining because I really need some iron, and we're low on diamonds and all that. And as you can see, my armor's suffering. But with that being said, guys, I want to go over today a question, a very simple question. And that question is this: are you living for God? Very simple question. Are you living for God? And not only that, are you putting God first? And when I say, are you putting God first, I guess that's really the main question I want to ask you guys today, because that is something that I've had to ask myself many, many times. And I have been very, very critical on myself about the answer to that question. So let me explain what I mean. There are many people that preach, and I have nothing against people who preach. Obviously, people need to preach, and I'm in full support of people who do it with a good heart. However, there are people, even with good intentions, that want to get to a point where they say this, right? Put God first, and then they explain to you how to do that. Or what they think is the best way to do that. And the way that they say to do that is going to be to, before you eat, pray to God. Before you go to bed, pray to God. Before you, get started in the morning, right after you wake up, pray to God. Before you watch that TV show, pray to God. Before you get on that video game, pray to God. You get the theme, right? Before you do everything, pray to God frequently and always, right? Or read the Bible, before doing X, Y, Z. And that's not necessarily bad advice. That is good advice in theory. And the reason I say in theory is not because I don't think you shouldn't do it. I absolutely think you should do that. But the problem lies in the situation where people take that literally and they don't look any further beyond. And so I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that. So what I mean by that is this. When people tend to listen to people preach and they say stuff like, put God first, always put him first, this and that, that is great advice. That is, of course, obviously very, very great advice. But the problem is they don't necessarily tell the rest of it. So yes, while you should be putting him first chronologically, you need to be putting him first in your heart as well. And that's really what I'm after today. And that's the question I want to ask you guys, because I sit here thinking to myself, right? I have to ask myself oftentimes, am I living for God? Am I putting him first in my heart versus chronologically? And oftentimes I have to tell myself in certain circumstances, no, I am not. And that is, of course, not something that I want to hear. Especially, being honest with yourself is pretty hard when you know that you're in the wrong. And one thing is, I'll give you a couple examples, right? And again, I'm going to be very vulnerable in this YouTube channel. This is not going to be I'm holier than thou, I'm better than you, I don't mess up like that because, I'm so good and whatever the case is. I'm never going to be like that. I despise that way of thinking, and I'm going to be just a straight up honest, this is me, I'm fallen just like the rest of you type, vibe to it. But anyway, so the thing is, when you get to that area of your life, in any given day where, let's say, the big game's coming on, or let's say, a new movie's coming out, or, you're hanging out with that girl you've been talking to for so long, or whatever the case may be, and you just get to that point where you really just want to get to that point. So you put all stuff on the back burner. There may be times where you're like, oh, this girl's coming over, so, I have to study, but I'm just going to, throw everything away real fast. I'm going to look over, I'm going to skim over because I can just do it later. And you end up doing it later, and then the girl comes over and you're like, oh, you guys have a good time and whatever, and then she leaves, and then you're just kind of like, all right, back to business. And you prioritize that girl over, and the time you spend with her over being, studious or whatever the case is. And I'm just making up an example because I'm going to tie it into what I'm about to say next. So with that being said, this is no different than basically prioritizing stuff over God. Now you may be wondering, like, hey, what are you talking about? What I'm talking about is this. When you have a situation where you want to do something very, very badly, whether it be, watching a football game or, hanging out with a girl, playing a video game, whatever it is, you are effectively worshiping something else when you put it before God in your heart. Again, not chronologically, in your heart. So I cannot tell you how many times I have gone home because I've been stressed from work and I've wanted to just watch college football, or I've wanted to just, sit back, watch YouTube and do nothing the rest of the night because my mind is just fried from having to deal with people all day. And I will sit there and, I will get very frustrated and aggravated with the day. And I will just kind of be like, instead of reading, because typically what I do is I read 5 chapters. I at least read 5 chapters. That's just me personally. 5's an even number to me. I know it's technically an odd number, but 5 is a good number. I don't know why. It's just 5 is the number that was in my heart for how often I should study the Bible and, or how much I should read the Bible. And that doesn't always happen. There are times where God will be like, hey, read this psalm or read this proverb instead. But there are times where most days I just read the Bible 5 chapters at a time. And I will, again, maybe not be feeling it one day, and I will be frustrated and say, you know what, I'm not going to read 5 chapters because I don't want to be burdened, which sounds terrible, but I don't want to be burdened with, having to take the time to read this. So I'm just going to read, a quick, like 1 chapter instead, or, skim over, of a single verse or a single whatever the case is, and then just move on with my day and be done with it. And that is a horrible way to look at stuff, guys, because while the number of chapters that I read is not so important, or is not so much important compared to, what exactly it is that I'm putting in my heart. So I am idolizing. And by the way, guys, no, you may not be bowing down and worshiping the god of college football or, the god of Minecraft or whatever the case is. But what you are doing is worship is a form of, or idolatry rather, is a form of worship. And that literally just means to put something in your heart as a priority before God consistently. That's what that means. And unfortunately, we get into this habit of, having unknown idols that we just don't even think about. Sometimes we'll wake up and check the phone first thing in the morning before praying. That's idolatry of social media if you do that consistently on a regular basis and you don't put God before that. And again, guys, I'm not sitting here condemning anyone. I am just as guilty as that as everybody else. And, I've been doing my best to fix that. I've been getting into a point where I'm like, okay, I need to, before I have to consciously tell myself though, but I have to sit there and be like, okay, instead of doing, this and that, I have to, focus up. I just have to focus up and, do what I need to do with God before I pick up my phone or, start getting ready for work or whatever it is. And I will sometimes, again at work, I will not only, with the example of the whole Bible situation of shortening the studying of that, but there will be times where, I'll be at work and I'll be stressed out and I'm looking forward to my lunch break and I'm like, you know what? It's been stressful. I am very annoyed by people today and I'm just in a bad mood and I just want to have peace and quiet lunchtime by myself, and that is what I want to do. So I say a quick prayer before I eat and I will just be like blah, 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 and just mumble through the prayer so I can get to the food and start eating, because that's ultimately what I want above anything else. And that's, again, terrible because I'm putting the food before God. And again, I'm not saying food is bad. That food's good, right? But God gave us stomachs and a way to eat food and gave us food for a reason. But it's never an excuse to sit there and say, hey, you know what? I'm hungry, and so that's more important than my relationship with God. So I'm going to just basically bypass everything so that way I can, get to whatever it is that I want to eat. And again, it's sad because it's more common than we think. And unfortunately, even if we don't want to admit that we do it, a lot of us, maybe there's one person out there that's just, super devoted and never does this and, doesn't struggle with this, and, good for you. That is amazing. And I'm not going to sit here and, play the card of like, you're lying. Like, no, if you really don't do that, then congratulations, you are a very impressive person. But for the majority of us, we do have problems where we put stuff before God. And again, even if you put them chronologically, there are problems with just focusing on the chronological part. And so that's why, again, I wanted to make this video to kind of ask you guys, what are you putting first and who are you putting first? What are you worshiping over God, if anything, and how are you going to fix that in your life? So I'll give you an example for me, right? A real life example, and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go mine. I'm probably going to go mine over here. But a real life example that I can give you is for the longest time, and again, I still struggle with this to this day, so it's not like I'm completely cured of it, but I've gotten much better. I'm very proud of that. But there are times where I will, kind of like the food example. I will go on lunch break from work, and I will whip out the food, warm it up, whatever, and then I will start to say the prayer. And if I catch myself kind of like mumbling through it, I will stop. I will say, hey, don't do this. Correct yourself. And then I will continue to re-say the prayer slower on purpose, and I will truly try to put meaning and emphasis and emotion into it, because ultimately that's what I'm trying to go after is, I'm trying to go after an actual intimate connection with God, and not something that I just ritually or routinely say so that way I can just get past it to get to the real main event, which is the food. And I say that in quotes. But that's where I raise you this question. Are you doing something like that? Are you putting something before God? And if you are, how are you going to get that out of your life? Not out of your life forever, and that's not what I mean. But how are you going to get that, out of the front and center? How are you going to get that out of the way so you can put God first? Because I can tell you right now, it is hurting your spiritual life. It is, regardless of what you may think or how you may feel like, oh, I put stuff before God, but me and him are tight, so it's all good. Guys, idolatry is literally the first sin in the Bible. I mean, not the first sin in the Bible. It is the first commandment that I misspoke. It is the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Like you shall have no other gods other than me. So you may think, like, again, I don't worship wood and bronze and stone and gold and silver and statues of golden calves like they did in the Bible in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament to some degree. I don't sit there and do that, And you may not. And in fact, most people probably listening to this do not do that. But again, idolatry does not necessarily mean just bowing in front of a physical image. It means consistently putting something before God because you're more interested in it and you're putting it as a higher priority than God. And with that being said, we need to, as a collective, be a lot better at keeping each other accountable and to really identify within our own lives what we're doing wrong. Because self-reflection is ultimately, one of the best things that you can have, because, I've always been taught this. If you should definitely judge yourself, because if you don't, God will, and basically that doesn't mean, God does judge all. I'm not saying that he won't ever judge you if you judge yourself, but the meaning behind that saying is, if you don't judge yourself, more than likely someone who never judges themselves and who never, reflects on themselves and tries to fix their behavior probably isn't a Christian, and it's one of those things where, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. So not all atheists are non-self-reflective, and, a lot of them are reflective on oneself. And I'm not saying that they can't be moral people, but what I am saying is, you'd be hard-pressed to find a true Christian that does not self-reflect and does not self-judge. And so, with that being said, yeah, if you don't judge yourself, well, then likely you're not going to be held accountable by yourself for your actions. Therefore, you're not going to know you're doing wrong. Therefore, you're not going to go to God to ask for forgiveness. You're not going to go to God to ask, for forgiveness through the blood of Jesus. And you're not going to be seeking that redemption through Christ because you think you don't need it, because you don't judge yourself. You don't think that you can do any wrong. And when you do, you're just kind of like, oh, that was their fault, not mine. And that's a very dangerous mindset to be in. And It's something that I pray that if you are in that, you do break out. But that's besides the point, of what I was saying earlier, although it's really not, but it kind of is. But what I mean is, when you judge yourself, God says in the Bible that there is no condemnation for those in Christ, right? And so with that being said, that doesn't mean he doesn't necessarily judge you. He does. In fact, in the Bible, it's a cool, interesting study you can do. A lot of people picture judgment like the judgment seat of Christ. They picture that as one big thing. Like everybody gathers around, everyone who's ever lived and ever has lived and whoever will live and whatever, they all gather around one giant seat. And then it's just kind of like, you're going to hell, you're not, you're going to hell, you're not. But that's not what the Bible describes. The Bible actually describes, there's been a lot of judgments in the Bible. You have judgment of sin, which was on Calvary with Jesus on the cross. But there's the two big judgments are the judgment seat of Christ and then the great white throne of judgment. So the great white throne, and I'm not trying to get too sidetracked here, but in a nutshell, the judgment seat of Christ is for Christians. It's for those who have judged themselves throughout the period of their lives. And even though they are filled with sin, because we are, as sinful beings, as nature would have it. Yeah, I say nature, our nature, would have it. We are fallen beings, and we have very much flawed ideologies and flawed minds and flawed hearts and whatever the case may be. And so through Christ, we have that redemption. And so there shall be no condemnation for those in Christ. That means that in the judgment seat of Christ, we won't be condemned to hell. There is no hell for Christians. Again, if you are, I'm not just saying, I'm a Christian and just saying it. I mean, actually being about it. And that's, again, where the whole are you judging yourself ties in. Because although you can judge yourself and be an atheist, you're not accepting yourself in Christ, or you're not accepting Christ. But if you are a true Christian, you most likely are going to be judging yourself because of Christ. And so, again, just saying to yourself, am I judging myself? Am I being hard on myself? Because, in the judgment seat of Christ, no condemnation for any of his children, and we all basically, it's kind of like based on your rewards. So, I am, and I believe it describes the Bible describes them as crowns. So not like, you get this much money. That's not what it means. It's like, you're getting crowns. So like you get the crown of salvation, there's a crown of righteousness, a crown of all these different things. I think there's like 7 crowns. Don't hold me to the fire on that. I haven't read that in a while, that part of the Bible, but from what I last remember, I think it's like 7 crowns or something like that. And we're all given to crowns to us according to what we did on earth as far as our works. And that does not mean we get salvation based on works, because it says, I believe, again, I'm paraphrasing here, but it says that your foundation is Christ, and what you build on that foundation is up to you. So if it's made of silver and gold, then when it's tested in the fire, it will stand strong. But if it's made of straw and hay and wood, it will burn in the fire. That basically the fire of righteousness that tests the works that you've done over your life. So while you don't have salvation in works, you do have rewards in works, because it says, even if you're, again, I'm paraphrasing, but even the one who has just a foundation left will be saved by his faith in Jesus, but will not receive any rewards. And again, I'm not quoting that exactly, but that is what is said in the Bible. And when it comes to your great white throne of judgment, that is essentially all condemnation, because at that point, when it comes to the great white throne of judgment, that is for everybody. And this may not make a lot of sense to some of you if you haven't studied like the timeline of biblical events. And so this may sound like Chinese, but maybe I'll go into that a little bit later. Maybe not, whatever God has me do, truthfully. But when it comes to the great white throne of judgment, again, the way I've always seen it, the way it's always been taught to me, and the way that I've interpreted it while studying, is that is all condemnation, because that is for all non-believers. So essentially, and I could be wrong on that particular part, but I do think that it is, I do think that it has to do with basically God saying, okay, you didn't want to accept my son. You didn't want to, accept Jesus. So therefore, I'm going to hold you to my perfect I'm going to hold you to my perfect standard of holiness, which is Jesus. And without Jesus, clearly nobody on planet Earth ever is going to or has ever lived up to that other than Jesus himself. And so with that being said, when it says that if your name is not written in the book of life, you'll go to hell. I do believe that that's the judgment that they're talking about, where, yeah, the book, is basically saying, hey, did you live the way you were supposed to live? And everyone's answer is going to be no, because they didn't live perfectly. They didn't live without blemish because they didn't accept Jesus. And so that's just, and I'm not trying to do like a whole teaching session on that, but that is how I understand it. There could be a mix of Christian and a non-believer judgment in the Great White Throne of Judgment. But again, I do stick firm to the fact that there are two different judgments, at least, as far as like in the end times. One is the Great White Throne of Judgment. The other one is the Judgment Seat of Christ. And those are two different events. But again, with that being said, I am just kind of getting on a tangent, but my point was bringing all that up is judge yourself, make sure that you're being honest with yourself, make sure that you understand, okay, am I putting God first, am I not, and being honest about it, because God's not going to be mad at you for recognizing where you're faulting. God's not going to be mad at you for sitting there and being like, man, I'm not putting God first. And then he's going to be like, yeah, how dare you? Like, no, he's going to be like, okay, well, how are we going to fix that together? So with that being said, guys, I know that I did get a little lackluster at the end, at first talking about the main message and then going on to talk about, the judgments and the difference and whatever. But regardless, yeah, my apologies for getting off topic. But with that being said, I do, again, want to end off with this. Are you putting God first? And if so, which way are you putting God first? So with that being said, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. And on the judgment thing, if you, and I'm probably going to get into my Bible after this and figure that out. But again, the way that I take it is there are no believers at the Great White Throne of Judgment. Like, as far as like believers being judged, I think that they're judged, different ways. I think like there's the sheep and goat judgment. There's the Great White Throne of Judgment. There's the Judgment Seat of Christ, judgment of the sin on the cross. And there's all these different judgments. So, I think there's like 7 different judgments in the Bible. But either way, I do want to get your opinion on that. If you, disagree, and I don't want this to turn into a debate or like oh, you're dumb because you didn't know that. Like, it's been a while since I've read it, and it's not been like a main focal point of study for me. Like, of course, I have studied it, and I have looked at it for a period of time, but I haven't made it my life's work to study the different judgments, so I could be wrong. But with that being said, I do ask you to offer a friendly correction to me if I did get one of those things wrong. But either way, thank you very much for watching. God bless you all. See you in the next one. Peace out, guys.